In 1908, the auto business was largely a cottage industry of tinkerers, entrepreneurs, speculators, and dreamers. Two men were about to change that in the fall of '08. One was Henry Ford, whose affordable Model T began mass production in September, and the other was William Crapo Durant, who had already built the nation's largest horse-drawn carriage company. He had plans that September for doing the same with automobiles.
Durant was always considered a guy with a lot of enthusiasm and no brakes. But he had this great confidence that he was a great salesman and great promoter, and he was. And he wasn't a backslapping type of guy. He was quiet, but he had a dazzling smile, and he was just charmed people. People liked Billy Durant. He was a charismatic guy.
On September 16, 1908, Durant filed incorporation papers for the General Motors Company, which consisted of Buick Motor, an automaker he had helped rescue from insolvency only a few years earlier. Between 1908 and 1910, the newly formed GM and Durant went on an acquisition spree, adding more than 20 companies to the fold, including Oldsmobile, Cadillac, and Oakland.
Durant, in putting together General Motors, he said, I'm all for buying all of the brands and companies I can, knowing that a lot of them won't make it, but some definitely will. And my bet is that in the long run, the ones that do survive will be strong enough that we'll have a going concern.
But his frenetic growth strategies for GM came back to haunt Durant, whose strengths as a visionary and salesman were undermined by his managerial shortcomings. Only 2 years after giving birth to GM, he was out.
By 1910, General Motors had grown so fast and in so many directions in 2 years that the books were a mess, the balance sheet was a wreck, and he had loans all over the place. The bankers got together and said, this must cease.
During GM's first few years of existence, product highlights included Oldsmobile's limited touring, which retailed for $4,600, more than what it cost to buy a no-frills three-bedroom house at the time. Closed bodies as standard equipment, first introduced on 1910 Cadillacs. And in 1912, also on Cadillacs, the first electric self-starter, which opened automotive travel to even more consumers.
No longer did you have to be a large-statured person to operate an automobile. This largely opened up the automobile to a lot of smaller-statured people, a lot of elderly people as well as women. And Cadillac played upon that. They did their first advertising in those early days to women, which was a non-traditional role for a woman to drive a car.
At the same time, Billy Durant planted seeds for a comeback by hooking up with former Buick racing team driver Louis Chevrolet and creating a brand that would soon rival Ford's Model T for mass appeal and benefit future generations in other ways.
Some people think it improves the gene pool because you could date girls who were 20 miles away as opposed to being on the next farm.